The old upright piano sat in the corner of the Choi family's small living room, its wooden surface showing signs of age and love. 8-year-old Soo-jin sat on the bench, her feet dangling above the floor as her small fingers stretched across the keys. The afternoon sunlight filtered through thin curtains, casting a warm glow over the child as she played. Soo-jin's mother, Hana, stood in the kitchen doorway, dish towel in hand, watching her daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement. Even after 4 years of witnessing her child's remarkable talent, she still found herself stopping whatever she was doing whenever Soo-jin played. Again, Soo-jin whispered to herself, restarting a difficult passage from Mozart's Sonata in C major, her brow furrowed in concentration as her fingers danced across the keys with surprising speed and precision. The piano had come into their lives by chance. Soo-jin's father, Jun, a mathematics professor at the local community college, had found it listed for free in the newspaper classifieds shortly after they moved to America from South Korea. "It needs some work," the previous owner had said, apologetically as Jun and his brother-in-law struggled to load it into a borrowed truck. "But it still plays." No one in the family played piano. Jun knew numbers, not notes, and Hana had sung in her church choir back home, but had never learned an instrument. They had taken the piano simply because it was free, and because Jun thought it might someday be nice for their daughter to learn music. What they didn't expect was how quickly 4-year-old Soo-jin would take to it. Within days of the piano's arrival, she was picking out simple melodies she had heard on the radio or in cartoons. By the end of the first month, Hana noticed her daughter playing songs with both hands, songs no one had taught her. "I think she might have a gift," Hana had told Jun one night after Soo-jin had gone to bed. Jun, always practical, had nodded thoughtfully. "Let's find her a teacher," he had replied. "A real one. Someone who can tell us if this is normal or—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Hana understood. They both wondered if their daughter might be truly special. Mrs. Chen lived 3 blocks away and had taught piano for over 30 years. She had a reputation for strictness and high standards, rarely accepting students under the age of 6. But when Hana called to inquire, explaining her daughter's unusual interest, Mrs. Chen had reluctantly agreed to meet with them. "Play something for me," Mrs. Chen had instructed Soo-jin at that first meeting, her voice gentle but firm. The older woman sat straight-backed in a chair beside the grand piano in her living room, which was filled with framed photographs of former students and certificates from prestigious music competitions. Soo-jin, suddenly shy, had looked to her mother for reassurance. Hana nodded encouragingly, and Soo-jin turned back to the keys. She began to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but with variations, little flourishes and embellishments that transformed the simple children's tune into something more complex and beautiful. Mrs. Chen's eyebrows had risen slightly, but she showed no other reaction. When Soo-jin finished, the teacher asked, "Who taught you that?" "Nobody," Soo-jin replied softly. "I heard it on TV and made it prettier." Mrs. Chen had turned to Hana and Jun with an expression they couldn't quite read. "I'll take her," she said simply. "We start tomorrow." 4 o'clock. That had been 4 years ago. Now, at 8 years old, Soo-jin was playing pieces that Mrs. Chen typically reserved for her teenage students. The old teacher had never seen anything like it in all her decades of teaching. "She doesn't just play the notes," Mrs. Chen had told Soo-jin's parents during their most recent parent-teacher meeting. "She feels the music in her bones. It's like she was born knowing these pieces and her fingers are just remembering what they already knew." Jun had nodded, though he didn't fully understand. Music remained a mystery to him, beautiful but incomprehensible, like a language he had never learned. Hana, however, understood better. She had seen how Soo-jin would sometimes close her eyes while playing, swaying slightly, completely lost in the music. Back in the living room, Soo-jin had moved on from Mozart to Chopin's Minute Waltz. Her fingers flew over the keys at a speed that seemed impossible for hands so small. The piece was meant to be played in under a minute, a challenge even for accomplished adult pianists, but Soo-jin had mastered it at 7. The phone rang, interrupting the cascade of notes. Hana hurried to answer it, mouthing sorry to her daughter as she picked up the receiver. "Yes, this is the Choi residence," Hana said, her accent still noticeable despite years of careful practice. Soo-jin continued to play softly. Watching her mother's expression change from polite interest to surprise, then excitement. Yes, she is available to perform, Hannah was saying, reaching for a pen and paper. The community center on Saturday? At 3 o'clock? We will be there. When she hung up, Hannah turned to Soo-jin with bright eyes. That was Mr. Thompson from the Arts Council. They're having a special concert this weekend, a fundraiser for music programs in schools. Someone showed him a video of you playing at the school talent show, and he wants you to perform. Soo-jin's hand stilled on the keys. Will there be a lot of people? She asked, suddenly looking younger than her 8 years. Hannah sat beside her daughter on the piano bench. Yes, probably. But you know what Mrs. Chen always says, when you play for the music, not for the people? Soo-jin nodded seriously. What should I play? Something that shows them who you are, Hannah suggested. Something that makes them feel what you feel when you play. Over the next few days, Soo-jin practiced with new intensity. She decided on Liszt's La Campanella, one of the most technically challenging pieces in the piano repertoire. Mrs. Chen had introduced it to her just a month earlier, warning that most pianists worked for years to master it. But Soo-jin had taken to it immediately, drawn to its bell-like tones and lightning-quick hand crossings. Are you sure? Jen asked when she announced her choice at dinner. That's a very difficult piece. Maybe something simpler would be better for your first big performance. Soo-jin shook her head, a determined look on her face. This one feels right, Dad. It sounds like joy. The day of the concert arrived bright and clear. The community center had been transformed, its usual fluorescent lighting dimmed and replaced with softer lamps. A grand piano, on loan from the university music department, gleamed under the lights at the center of the makeshift stage. Backstage, Soo-jin peeked through the curtains at the gathering crowd. More people than she had expected filled the rows of chairs. Parents, teachers, community members, and even a camera crew from the local news station. There are so many people, she whispered, stepping back from the curtain. Her father knelt down to eye level with her. Remember when you were learning to ride a bike? He asked. You were scared then, too. Soo-jin nodded. But once you started pedaling, you forgot to be scared because you were having too much fun, June continued. This is the same. Once you start playing, you'll forget everyone is watching. Mr. Thompson stepped onto the stage to welcome everyone and explain the purpose of the fundraiser. We believe every child deserves access to music education, he was saying, and tonight you'll see exactly why that matters. Soo-jin was introduced as a remarkable young talent. As she walked onto the stage in her blue dress, a polite applause filled the room. She looked impossibly small next to the grand piano. She bowed quickly, then climbed onto the bench, adjusting it forward to reach the pedals. She took a deep breath, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The first notes of La Campanella filled the room, delicate, bell-like tones that gradually built into a dazzling display of technique. Soo-jin's small hands moved with blinding speed, executing jumps and trills that seemed physically impossible for a child. The audience's polite interest quickly transformed into astonishment. People leaned forward in their seats, some with mouths slightly open in disbelief. In the back row, a visiting music professor from the university whispered to his colleague, "This can't be real." But it was real. Soo-jin played with the technical precision of a seasoned concert pianist, yet with an emotional depth that was entirely her own. Her face showed complete absorption, occasionally breaking into a small smile during particularly beautiful passages, as if she herself was surprised and delighted by the sound she was creating. When she struck the final notes and the last echoes faded into silence, there was a moment of stunned quiet before the room erupted. The audience rose to their feet, applause thundering through the small community center. Some people wiped tears from their eyes. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Soo-jin, suddenly remembering where she was, stood and bowed shyly. Her gaze found her parents in the front row, her mother crying openly, her father standing tall, his usual reserve broken by a face-splitting grin. What none of them knew then was that someone had recorded her performance and uploaded it online, where it would soon go viral. By morning, Soo-jin's performance would have millions of views. By the following week, it would catch the attention of Justice Elena Rivera, a Supreme Court justice with a passion for arts education. But in this moment, as Soo-jin took another bow before running off stage into her mother's waiting arms, She was simply a little girl who had shared something she loved, unaware that her life was about to change forever. 3 days after the community center performance, Hana sat at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone with wide eyes. Soojin's father Jun leaned over her shoulder, his coffee forgotten in his hand. 2 million views, Hana whispered. How is this possible? The video of their daughter playing Liszt's La Campanella had spread across the internet like wildfire. Someone from the audience had recorded the performance and shared it online with the simple caption, "8-year-old piano prodigy will leave you speechless." The comments section overflowed with amazement, with viewers from around the world expressing disbelief that such a young child could play with such technical mastery. In the living room, oblivious to her newfound fame, Soojin practiced scales. For her, nothing had changed. The piano was still her world, the keys beneath her fingers still the most natural place for her hands to be. The phone rang, startling both parents. Hana answered it hesitantly, still overwhelmed by the sudden attention their family was receiving. "Yes, this is the Choi residence," she said. Jun watched as his wife's expression changed from confusion to shock. She sat up straighter, switching to speak in more formal English. "Yes, of course. We would be honored." "May I ask?" She paused, listening intently. "I understand. Yes, thank you very much." When she hung up, she turned to Jun with a look of disbelief. "That was someone from the office of Justice Elena Rivera," she said slowly, as if saying it out loud might make it less true. "From the Supreme Court of the United States." Jun set his coffee down carefully. "The Supreme Court? What did they want?" "Justice Rivera saw Soojin's video. She's organizing a special concert at the court to highlight exceptional young talent in the arts. She wants Soojin to be one of 3 children from across the country to perform." Hana's voice trembled slightly. "Before all 9 justices, Jun. All of them." Jun ran a hand through his hair, a habit when he was processing something unexpected. "When?" 6 weeks from now," Hana replied. "They're going to send an official invitation." They both looked toward the living room where their daughter continued playing, the scales now transforming into a Bach prelude. How could they explain to an 8-year-old what this meant? The official invitation arrived 3 days later, in a cream-colored envelope bearing the Supreme Court seal. Soojin stared at it curiously as her parents explained what was being asked of her. "They want me to play for judges?" she asked, trying to understand. "Not just any judges, honey," her mother explained. "The most important judges in the whole country. They work in a very special building in Washington, D.C. Soojin nodded thoughtfully. "Will they be mad if I make a mistake?" Jun laughed softly. "No, they're not judging your playing like a competition. They want to hear you because they think music is important for all children to learn." "Like Mrs. Chen says," Soojin replied, referring to her piano teacher. "Music makes your brain work better." "Exactly," her father agreed. "And these judges can help make sure more children get to learn music in school." Soojin considered this for a moment, then asked the question that concerned her most. "Can I pick what song I play?" Her parents exchanged a glance. The invitation had mentioned that the children could select their own pieces, with approval from the event coordinator. "Yes," Hana said. "What would you like to play?" Soojin didn't hesitate. "The Bumblebee one." Jun raised his eyebrows. "Flight of the Bumblebee? But you've only just started learning that." It was true. Mrs. Chen had introduced Rimsky-Korsakov's notoriously difficult piece to Soojin only 2 weeks earlier, as a long-term challenge. The composition was famous for its rapid, chromatic runs that mimicked the erratic flying pattern of a bumblebee, a piece that even accomplished adult pianists found challenging. "I can learn it," Soojin said with the simple confidence of childhood. "It sounds like how my thoughts feel sometimes, all buzzy and quick." The next day, they took the invitation to Mrs. Chen's house for her regular lesson. The elderly piano teacher adjusted her glasses as she read the formal letter, her expression growing increasingly serious. "The Supreme Court," she said finally. "In all my years of teaching," she looked at Soojin, who sat patiently at the piano bench swinging her legs back and forth. "And you want to play Flight of the Bumblebee?" Mrs. Chen asked directly. Soojin nodded. "Yes, please." Mrs. Chen pressed her lips together, considering. "That piece is very difficult. Professional pianists spend months perfecting it." "I know," Soojin replied, "but it feels right." When I play it, it makes me happy inside. Mrs. Chen turned to Hana and Jun. We would need to adjust her practice schedule. 2 hours every day minimum, no exceptions. Whatever she needs, Jun assured her. We'll make it work. And you, Mrs. Chen said, turning back to Sujin. This will be hard work. Harder than anything you've done before. Are you ready? Sujin nodded solemnly. I'm ready. The weeks that followed were intense. The Choi household revolved around Sujin's practice schedule. Jun rearranged his teaching hours at the college to drive Sujin to extra lessons with Mrs. Chen. Hana adjusted mealtimes to fit around practice sessions. Their small apartment filled with the sound of the same musical passages played over and over, gradually increasing in speed and precision. Mrs. Chen was strict, but caring. Again, she would say when Sujin's fingers fumbled a particularly tricky passage. But slower this time. Speed comes from accuracy, not from hurry. 3 weeks before the performance, a crew from a national news show arrived to interview the family. The reporter, a friendly woman with a bright smile, knelt down to Sujin's level. How does it feel to know you'll be playing for the Supreme Court justices? She asked. Sujin thought for a moment. Kind of scary, she admitted. But Mrs. Chen says when I'm scared, I should imagine the music as colors, not notes. Then I forget to be scared. The reporter smiled. And what color is Flight of the Bumblebee? Yellow and black, Sujin replied promptly. But with sparkly bits of gold when the high notes come. The segment aired the following week, bringing even more attention to the upcoming performance. Letters and emails poured in from around the country, from music teachers, parents of young musicians, and even a few famous pianists offering encouragement. One letter in particular caught Hana's attention. It was from a public school in Detroit where the music program had been cut due to budget constraints. The music teacher had shown Sujin's video to her students before the program ended, and they had written a group letter telling Sujin how she inspired them. Hana read the letter to Sujin that evening. See how important this is? She said gently. It's not just about playing a hard piece. It's about showing people why music matters. Sujin nodded, taking the letter and looking at the signatures of children she had never met. Something shifted in her expression. A new understanding of why this performance mattered. The next day, her practice took on a different quality. Mrs. Chen noticed it immediately. Something has changed, she observed during their lesson. Your playing has intention now. As the performance date grew closer, Sujin began having trouble sleeping. She would lie awake, her fingers moving slightly as she practiced passages in her mind. Sometimes she woke from dreams where her fingers were stuck, unable to move across the keys. One night, Hana found her sitting at the piano in the dark. Not playing, just staring at the keys. What's wrong? Little one? Hana asked, sitting beside her daughter on the bench. What if I forget everything when I see all those important people? Sujin whispered. What if my hands shake too much to play? Hana wrapped an arm around her daughter's small shoulders. Do you remember when you were very little, maybe 4 years old, and you got lost at the grocery store? Sujin nodded. You were so scared, but then what happened? I remembered you said if I got lost I should go to the front where the cash registers are, Sujin recalled. That's right. And even though you were scared, you knew what to do, Hana said. This is the same. Your fingers know the music just like your feet know how to walk. Even if your mind gets scared, your fingers will remember. The day before they were to leave for Washington, D.C., Mrs. Chen invited them to her home for a final practice. She had invited a few of her other students and their parents to create a small audience. Play it exactly as you will play it tomorrow, Mrs. Chen instructed. Imagine these are the justices watching you. Sujin nodded, taking a deep breath as she had been taught. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself, then began to play. The music filled the room, lightning-fast notes that seemed impossible from such small hands. The piece built in intensity, the buzzing chromatic scales creating an almost hypnotic effect. When she reached the final notes, the small audience burst into applause. Mrs. Chen's eyes glistened with unshed tears. In 40 years of teaching, she said quietly to Jun and Hana, I have never heard it played better by anyone of any age. That night, as they packed their best clothes for the trip to Washington, a small package arrived for Sujin. Inside was a beautiful butterfly hairpin with a note from Justice Rivera herself. Looking forward to hearing you play, the note read. Music gives wings to our spirits just like butterflies. Sujin held the hairpin carefully, her face solemn with the weight of what lay ahead. Tomorrow she would play for the highest court in the land. Tomorrow she would show them why music mattered. Tomorrow her finger. Washington, D.C. was nothing like Soo-jin had imagined. Growing up in their small Midwestern town, she had only seen the nation's capital in pictures or on television. Now, as their taxi drove through the city, Soo-jin pressed her face against the window, taking in the grand white buildings and wide avenues lined with trees just beginning to show their spring leaves. "Look, Mom," she exclaimed, pointing at the Washington Monument rising like a needle into the blue sky. "It's so tall." Hannah smiled, watching her daughter's wonder. Beside her, Jun consulted his phone, checking their hotel address for the third time. They had never traveled this far as a family, and the importance of tomorrow's event weighed on him. Their hotel room was modest but clean, with 2 double beds and a view of a brick wall. A small basket of fruit waited on the desk with a note, with compliments from the office of Justice Rivera. Such thoughtfulness from people so important surprised the Choi family. "Let's practice," Soo-jin said immediately after setting down her small suitcase. She had insisted on bringing her own sheet music, though she had long ago memorized every note of Flight of the Bumblebee. "First, let's eat something," Hannah suggested gently. "Then we'll find somewhere for you to practice." The hotel didn't have a piano, but the concierge made a call and arranged for Soo-jin to use a practice room at a nearby music school. The room was small and windowless, with walls covered in sound-absorbing panels and a well-used upright piano in the corner. "It's not like our piano at home," Soo-jin said, running her fingers lightly over the keys. Some were slightly yellowed with age and a few had small chips at the edges. "But it will do for today," Jun said encouragingly. "Remember what Mrs. Chen always says. A good musician can make beautiful music on any instrument." Soo-jin finished with a small smile. She adjusted the bench and began her scales, warming up her fingers the way Mrs. Chen had taught her. Hannah and Jun exchanged a glance. Their daughter seemed calmer than they felt. Jun's stomach had been in knots since they'd received the invitation, and Hannah had hardly slept the night before. After 2 hours of practice, with only a few short breaks, Jun gently closed the piano lid. "That's enough for today," he said firmly. "You need to rest your fingers and your mind." Soo-jin nodded, suddenly looking tired. The excitement of the trip and the intensity of practice had worn her out. Back at the hotel, she fell asleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow, still clutching the butterfly hairpin Justice Rivera had sent. Hannah sat at the edge of the bed, gently stroking her daughter's hair. "She seems so small," she whispered to Jun. "I forget sometimes when she plays how young she really is." Jun nodded, thinking of the immense pressure on his 8-year-old daughter's shoulders. Should we have said no? He wondered aloud. Was this too much to ask of her? She wanted to do it, Hannah reminded him. And you've seen how she plays when she really wants to. Like she was born for it. Morning came too quickly. Sunshine streamed through the thin hotel curtains, waking Soo-jin before the alarm clock rang. She sat up immediately, fully alert. "Today's the day," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and nervousness. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Soo-jin, usually hungry in the mornings, picked at her pancakes, eating just enough to satisfy her worried mother. Jun checked and rechecked the schedule they had been sent, making sure they knew exactly where to go and when. A car sent by the Supreme Court arrived precisely at 10 a.m. The driver, a kind-faced man with salt and pepper hair, held the door open for them. "Nervous?" he asked Soo-jin as she climbed into the back seat. She nodded, clutching her sheet music folder to her chest. "Don't be," he said with a warm smile. "I've driven lots of people to the court. Lawyers arguing big cases, famous politicians, even presidents. And you know what? They're all nervous too. Being nervous just means you care about doing a good job." This simple wisdom seemed to comfort Soo-jin. Her grip on the folder loosened slightly and she managed a small smile. The Supreme Court building was even more impressive up close than in pictures. Massive marble columns supported a triangular pediment with the words, "Equal Justice Under Law," carved above them. Wide steps led up to bronze doors that seemed tall enough for giants. "It looks like a temple," Soo-jin whispered as they climbed the steps. Inside, the grandeur continued. Polished marble floors echoed under their feet, and the ceiling soared high above them. A court official met them in the Great Hall, introducing herself as Ms. Patel. "Welcome to the Supreme Court," she said warmly, bending slightly to address Sujin directly. "You must be our pianist," Sujin nodded, suddenly shy in the face of such formality. "The other performers are already here," Ms. Patel explained as she led them through corridors lined with portraits of past justices, a violinist from New York and a cellist from California. She showed them to a small room where two other children waited with their parents. The violinist was a serious-looking boy about 11 years old, with wire-rimmed glasses and a perfectly pressed suit. The cellist was a girl perhaps 12 or 13, her long dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, nervously rosening her bow. "This is Sujin Choi," Ms. Patel announced. "She'll be playing the piano for us today." The other children looked at Sujin with interest, clearly surprised by how young she was. The cellist smiled kindly, but the violinist just adjusted his glasses and returned to studying his music. "We have about an hour before the performance," Ms. Patel informed them. "Each of you will have 15 minutes to practice in the East Conference Room, where the concert will be held. The rest of the time you can wait here. There's water and some snacks on the table." The violinist went first. While he was gone, the cellist introduced herself to Sujin. "I'm Lucia," she said. "What are you playing today?" "Flight of the Bumblebee," Sujin replied, gaining confidence as she talked about music. "What about you?" "Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, Lucia said. "I've been working on it for almost a year." She paused, studying Sujin curiously. "How long have you been playing piano?" "Since I was 4, Sujin answered. "But I only started lessons when I was almost 5. Lucia's eyes widened slightly, but before she could respond, the violinist returned, and it was her turn to practice. When Lucia left, the room fell into an awkward silence. The violinist kept to himself, and Sujin sat close to her parents, watching the clock. Finally, it was Sujin's turn. Ms. Patel led her and her parents to the East Conference Room, a stately space with deep green walls and a massive conference table that had been moved aside to make room for a gleaming black Steinway grand piano. The sight of it made Sujin catch her breath. She had never played on such a magnificent instrument. "Go ahead," Ms. Patel encouraged. "Get a feel for it." Sujin approached the piano reverently. She adjusted the bench, then placed her hands on the keys. The first notes of Flight of the Bumblebee filled the room, and Sujin smiled. The piano's action was perfect, responsive without being too light, the tone rich and resonant. She played through the most difficult passages, getting used to the feel of this new piano. Ms. Patel watched with visible amazement, while Hannah and June stood proudly at the side of the room. "That was just practice?" Ms. Patel asked when Sujin finished. "Remarkable." All too soon, their 15 minutes were up and they returned to the waiting room. Sujin sat quietly, moving her fingers in her lap, mentally playing through her piece again and again. At exactly noon, Ms. Patel returned. "It's time," she announced. "The justices are ready." The children lined up in order of performance, first the violinist, then Lucia, and finally Sujin. Their parents would be seated in chairs at the side of the room. As they walked toward the East Conference Room, Sujin felt her heart pounding. This was so different from playing at the community center or in Mrs. Chen's living room. Here, in these hallowed halls, surrounded by history and power, her small shoulders carried not just the notes of her piece but the hopes of children, like those who had written to her, whose schools no longer had music programs. They entered the room to find it transformed. Chairs had been arranged in rows filled with court staff, a few reporters, and most intimidatingly, the 9 Supreme Court justices seated in the front row. Justice Rivera, a woman with silver-streaked dark hair and kind eyes, smiled encouragingly at the children. The Chief Justice welcomed everyone briefly, explaining the purpose of the concert, to highlight the importance of arts education in developing young minds. Then the performances began. The violinist played beautifully, his technique flawless if somewhat lacking in emotion. Lucia followed with her Bach, the rich tones of her cello filling the room with warmth and depth. Both received appreciative applause, and then it was Sujin's turn. As she walked to the piano, she felt impossibly small. The Steinway seemed enormous, the room vast, the audience, especially those 9 robed figures in the front row, overwhelming. She climbed onto the bench and adjusted it forward. Her feet barely reached the pedals. She took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. For one terrifying moment, her mind went blank. What was the first note? Her fingers hovered uncertainly over the keys as panic washed over her. Then she remembered her mother's words. Even if your mind gets scared, your fingers will remember. She closed her eyes, pictured the sheet music in her mind, and let her fingers find their way. The first few notes came. After the performance, everything seemed to happen in a blur. The justices approached the young musicians, offering congratulations and asking questions. Chief Justice Ramirez, a tall man with silver hair and serious eyes that crinkled when he smiled, bent down to speak directly to Sujin. "Young lady, I've attended concerts at Carnegie Hall and opera houses around the world," he said, his deep voice gentle. "But I've never heard anything quite like what you just played for us today." Sujin, still flushed with the excitement of performance and slightly overwhelmed by all the attention, managed a shy "Thank you, sir." Justice Rivera joined them, the butterfly hairpin Sujin wore catching her eye. "I see you got my little gift," she said with a warm smile. "It suits you perfectly." She turned to Hana and June, who stood nearby, pride and amazement written across their faces. "Mr. and Mrs. Choi, you have a remarkable daughter. Her performance today wasn't just impressive for her age, it was extraordinary by any standard." Photographers from the court's media office captured the moment. Sujin standing between her parents, surrounded by Supreme Court justices, her small face solemn yet glowing with quiet pride. That photo would later appear in newspapers across the country and on countless websites, becoming an iconic image in the ongoing national conversation about arts education. A small reception followed in an adjacent room. Court staff served punch and cookies while the young performers and their families chatted with the justices and invited guests. Sujin, finally relaxing after the intensity of her performance, nibbled on a cookie while Justice Chen, known for his love of classical music, discussed piano techniques with her. "When did you first know you wanted to be a pianist?" he asked. Sujin looked thoughtful. "I don't remember deciding," she answered honestly. "The piano just felt like it was already part of me, like my hands were made for it." Justice Chen nodded, his expression serious. "That's how it is with true callings. They don't feel like choices, they feel like recognitions." Across the room, Justice Rivera was deep in conversation with June and Hana. "Your daughter's performance today makes a powerful case for what I've been arguing for years," she said, her voice passionate but kept low. "Arts education isn't a luxury, it's essential. It develops parts of the brain and spirit that nothing else can reach." Jun nodded. "In Sujin's school, they only have music class once a week now. The teacher has to share time between 3 different schools. And yet look what that limited exposure has helped produce," Justice Rivera said, glancing at Sujin. "Imagine the talent going undiscovered in schools with no music programs at all." Before they left the court, Ms. Patel presented each young musician with a certificate and a small gift bag containing a book about the Supreme Court, a special pen with the court seal, and a handwritten note from Justice Rivera. "We've also arranged something special," Ms. Patel told the Choi family as they prepared to leave. "Justice Rivera has requested that you stay in Washington 1 extra day. Tomorrow morning, Sujin has been invited to play at a special session of the Senate Committee on Education, where they're discussing the Arts Education Funding Act." Hana and June exchanged surprised glances. The justice believes Sujin's performance could help the committee members understand what's at stake, Ms. Patel continued. "Of course, it's completely your choice." Jun looked at his daughter. "What do you think, Sujin? Would you be willing to play one more time?" Sujin nodded without hesitation. "If it helps other kids get music in their schools," she said simply. That evening, back in their hotel room, Sujin video called Mrs. Chen to tell her about the performance. The elderly piano teacher listened intently, her face filling the small phone screen. "Were you nervous?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Very nervous," Sujin admitted. "I almost forgot the first notes. But then I remembered what Mom told me about my fingers knowing what to do." Mrs. Chen smiled approvingly. "And tomorrow you play for the Senate? This is quite extraordinary." "I wish you could be here," Sujin said. "I am with you in the music," Mrs. Chen replied. "When you play, part of me is there." After saying goodnight to her teacher, Sujin noticed her parents talking quietly by the window. They looked worried. "What's wrong?" she asked, climbing onto the bed closest to them. Hana sat beside her daughter. "Nothing's wrong exactly. We're just a little concerned about tomorrow. The Senate committee. It's different from playing at the court." There might be people who don't agree about arts funding. It could feel less friendly. Will they be mad at me? Sujin asked, her eyes widening. No, June assured her quickly. No one will be mad at you. But this is becoming more than just playing piano. You're becoming part of a bigger discussion about how schools spend their money. Sujin thought about this. At 8 years old, she didn't fully understand politics or budgets, but she understood that her music was somehow important to people she had never met. I just want to play, she said finally. If it helps, I'll play for anyone who will listen. The next morning, a different car picked them up, this time taking them to the Senate office building. The hallways were busier than the Supreme Court had been, filled with people hurrying from meeting to meeting, phones in hand, voices echoing off marble floors. The committee room was smaller than Sujin had expected, with a raised dais where senators sat behind microphones and rows of chairs for spectators. A piano, not as grand as the one at the court, but still beautiful, had been placed to one side of the witness table. Justice Rivera was already there, chatting with a woman in a navy blue suit who was introduced as Senator Abigail Washington, the committee chair. This must be our young pianist, Senator Washington said, smiling warmly at Sujin. Thank you for coming today. Your performance at the court has already got people talking. Sujin looked around curiously. Where are all the people? Senator Washington laughed. They'll be here soon. The committee members are just finishing another meeting. But I should warn you, we've had quite a few requests from the press to cover this. There will be cameras, Sujin nodded, taking this in stride. After yesterday's performance, cameras seemed less intimidating. Gradually, the room filled. Committee members took their seats on the dais, aides and spectators filled the chairs, and reporters with cameras and notebooks positioned themselves along the walls. Sujin sat with her parents in the front row, watching it all with wide eyes. Senator Washington called the session to order, explaining that they were continuing their discussion of the Arts Education Funding Act, which would increase federal support for arts programs in public schools nationwide. Before we hear from our scheduled witnesses, we have a special guest performance, she announced. Many of you may have seen the video that has been circulating of an 8-year-old pianist playing at the Supreme Court yesterday. Justice Rivera has arranged for Sujin Choi to play for us this morning, to remind us all what's at stake in these discussions. Sujin walked to the piano with the same careful composure she had shown at the court. Today she wore the butterfly hairpin again, a small spot of color against her dark hair. The room fell silent as she adjusted the bench and placed her hands on the keys. This time there was no moment of panic. Sujin began Flight of the Bumblebee with confidence, her small fingers flying across the keys with astonishing speed and precision. The senators watched, some with visible amazement, others with more guarded expressions. When she finished, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Senator Washington thanked her warmly, then asked if she would be willing to answer a few questions from committee members. Sujin looked to her parents, who nodded encouragingly and agreed. Ms. Choi, began Senator Washington, using the formal address that made Sujin sit up a little straighter. How old were you when you first started playing piano? 4, Sujin answered, her voice clear in the microphone. But we didn't have lessons at first because they cost a lot of money. And how much music education do you get at your school? Asked another senator, a man with glasses and a friendly face. We have music class once a week for 45 minutes, Sujin replied. Ms. Rodriguez teaches us songs and about different instruments, but she has to go to 3 schools because there's not enough money for each school to have their own music teacher. A senator from across the aisle, his expression more skeptical, leaned forward. That was very impressive playing, young lady. But not every child is as talented as you are. Why should taxpayers fund arts programs for all students when only a few will excel? The room grew tense at the challenging question. Hana half rose from her seat, concerned, but Jun placed a gentle hand on her arm. Sujin thought for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. My friend David in my class isn't very good at playing the recorder, she said finally. But music makes him happy. He says it's the best part of his week. And Mrs. Chen, my piano teacher, says music builds better brains. Even if you never become a professional, she paused, then added with the simple wisdom of childhood. Also, you don't know who's talented until they get a chance to try. A murmur ran through the room and several senators nodded in agreement. Even the skeptical questioner gave a small smile of acknowledgement. After a few more questions, Senator Washington thanked Sujin and invited her to stay and listen to the scheduled testimony if she wished.
Jun and Ha.
6 months had passed since Sujin's performances in Washington, and life in the Choi household had found a new rhythm. The piano still occupied its place of honor in the living room, but now it was a different instrument, a beautiful baby grand, donated by a piano manufacturer who had seen Sujin play at the Supreme Court. The old upright had been given to Sujin's school, where it now stood in the newly established music room. On this particular autumn afternoon, Sujin sat at her piano working on a Beethoven sonata. At 8.5 years old, she still needed a cushion to sit at the proper height, but her playing had matured even in these few months. Mrs. Chen, who still came 3 times a week for lessons, said Sujin was now playing at the level of most university piano students. "Time for a break," Hana called from the kitchen. "You've been practicing for almost 2 hours." Sujin stretched her fingers and nodded. She had learned to pace herself better since the intense preparation for the Supreme Court performance. Though she still loved practicing, she now balanced it with other activities, riding her bike, reading books, and playing with friends from school. As Sujin entered the kitchen, the family's tablet chimed with an incoming video call. Jun, who was grading papers at the kitchen table, answered it. Justice Rivera's face appeared on the screen. In the months since their visit to Washington, the justice had kept in touch, checking in every few weeks. She had become something of a mentor to Sujin, encouraging her musical development, while also ensuring the young pianist wasn't overwhelmed by attention or expectations. "Good afternoon, Professor Choi," Justice Rivera said warmly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Justice," Jun replied. "We were just taking a break. Let me get Sujin." Sujin hurried to the tablet, her face lighting up. "Justice Rivera, I just learned the first movement of the Moonlight Sonata." The justice smiled. "That's wonderful, Sujin. You must play it for me next time I visit." Her expression became more serious. "But today, I'm calling with some news I thought you should hear directly from me. The Senate is voting on the Arts Education Access Act tomorrow." Sujin glanced at her father, not quite understanding the significance. Jun explained gently. "That's the bill that would give more money to schools for music and art classes." "The one you played for?" "Exactly," Justice Rivera said. "The committee you performed for recommended the bill with strong support. Your performance, and especially your answer to Senator Reynolds's question, made quite an impression. Will it pass?" Sujin asked. Justice Rivera's expression was cautiously optimistic. "It's been a tough fight, but yes, I believe it will. And if it does, I've been told the president would like you to be present at the signing ceremony next week." Hana, who had been listening from nearby, gasped softly. "The White House." "Sujin at the White House. If you're comfortable with that," the justice added quickly. "I know it's been a whirlwind few months and you've been careful about which opportunities Sujin accepts." It was true. Since their return from Washington, the Choi family had received countless invitations, television appearances, concert offers, even suggestions of record deals. They had declined most, accepting only a few that aligned with promoting arts education, and that wouldn't disrupt Sujin's schooling and childhood too severely. "Could I play at the ceremony?" Sujin asked eagerly. Justice Rivera laughed. "I think that could be arranged. I'll let the appropriate people know you're interested, and someone from the White House will contact you with details." After saying goodbye to the justice, the family sat at the kitchen table absorbing this news. The pasta Hana had been preparing for dinner bubbled on the stove, momentarily forgotten. "The White House," Jun said, shaking his head in wonder. "When we came to this country, I never imagined." Hana reached over and squeezed his hand. "You always said America was a place where anything could happen." Sujin was already thinking about what she might play at the ceremony. "I could play Flight of the Bumblebee again," she mused. "Or maybe something new." "Whatever you choose will be perfect," Hana assured her. The next day passed in a blur of anticipation. Sujin went to school as usual, though she found it hard to concentrate on fractions and spelling when her mind kept drifting to the Senate vote. Her teacher, Mr. Patel, seemed to understand, giving her an encouraging smile whenever their eyes met. The whole school had followed Sujin's journey with pride, and a bulletin board in the main hallway displayed newspaper clippings and photos of their now famous student. That evening, The family gathered around the television to watch the news. The Arts Education Access Act had passed by a narrow margin. Footage showed senators from both parties speaking about the bill, with several mentioning the remarkable young pianist whose performance had reminded them of the power of music education. Senator Washington, who had chaired the committee, was interviewed leaving the Senate chamber. This bill ensures that every public school in America will have funding for quality arts programs, she explained. It's not about creating professional musicians or artists. It's about giving all children the cognitive and emotional benefits that come from creative expression. The reporter asked, "How much of a role did Soo-Jin Choi's performance play in getting this passed?" Senator Washington smiled. "Sometimes it takes seeing the potential we're nurturing or wasting to understand what's really at stake. That little girl didn't just play the piano for us. She showed us why this matters." True to Justice Rivera's prediction, the call from the White House came the next morning. The signing ceremony would take place in 5 days in the Rose Garden if weather permitted. Soo-Jin was invited to play one short piece before the president signed the bill into law. The days before the ceremony were filled with careful preparation. Hana took Soo-Jin shopping for a new dress, a deep blue one with a silver sash that made her look both her age and solemnly appropriate for such an occasion. Jun called the university where he taught to arrange time off, and Mrs. Chen helped Soo-Jin select and perfect the piece she would play, Debussy's Clair de Lune, a departure from the technical fireworks of Flight of the Bumblebee, but no less beautiful or moving. This piece shows your musicality, not just your technique, Mrs. Chen explained. It shows you are growing as an artist. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and warm, perfect for the Rose Garden. The Choi family arrived at the White House 2 hours early, guided through security and into a waiting area where others involved in the ceremony gathered. Education officials, arts advocates, and several members of Congress who had championed the bill mingled, many coming over to meet Soo-Jin. "Remember those students who wrote to you from Detroit?" Hana whispered to Soo-Jin as they waited. "Their teacher is here, the lady in the red blazer." Soo-Jin looked across the room and saw a woman with short gray hair and a kind face. The teacher noticed her looking and came over, introducing herself as Ms. Townsend. "My students and I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Our music program was completely cut 3 years ago. Now with this new funding, we'll be able to rebuild it. We're getting instruments, sheet music, everything we need." Soo-Jin smiled shyly. "I'm glad I could help." "You did more than help," Ms. Townsend said. "You reminded a lot of important people what they already knew in their hearts but had forgotten." Soon, they were ushered into the Rose Garden, where rows of chairs faced a podium decorated with the presidential seal. A beautiful grand piano stood nearby. The garden was in full bloom, roses of every color providing a stunning backdrop for the ceremony. The president arrived to applause, accompanied by Justice Rivera and several key senators who had supported the bill. After brief introductions, Soo-Jin was called forward to play. She walked to the piano with the same quiet dignity she had shown at the Supreme Court and the Senate, though this time, a subtle confidence had replaced her earlier nervousness. She adjusted the bench, took a breath, and began to play. The dreamy, gentle notes of Clair de Lune floated through the Rose Garden, creating a moment of tranquil beauty amid the usual bustle of Washington politics. The piece was a perfect choice, its delicate passages showcasing Soo-Jin's sensitivity and musical maturity, rather than just technical brilliance. When she finished, the applause was warm and appreciative. The president himself helped her from the bench, then motioned for her to stay beside him as he moved to the signing table. "This young lady," he said, gesturing to Soo-Jin, "represents what we're striving for with this legislation. Not just technical excellence, but the chance for every child to find their voice, whether through music, painting, dance, or any other creative pursuit." He signed the Arts Education Access Act with several pens, handing the first one to Soo-Jin. "This is for you," he said, "a reminder that even the youngest among us can make a difference when they share their gifts." Cameras flashed as Soo-Jin accepted the pen, her expression solemn with the understanding that something important had just happened, something she had helped make possible. After the ceremony, as they prepared to leave the White House, Justice Rivera approached the family one last time. "What will you do now?" she asked Soo-Jin. "You could have any musical career you want, you know. Concerts, recordings, tours." Soo Jin looked up at her parents, then back to the justice. I want to go to school and pee.